Greetings and welcome to the class. My name is Professor Kevin Matthews and I am the professor for HRMN 300 for the fall semester of 2018. And this is going to be I'm excited about tonight's chapter because it's comp and benefits. This is what I do for a living. Sometimes I'm dealing with it on the back end where somebody's saying, okay, this is how much money I made, how much do I owe in taxes? But then there's some other times where I get a chance to work with a company and say, hey, this is how you want to get somebody taken care of, and all the stuff that's necessary. So, and we've just sort of a summation of where we've been. Again, our diagram that we have sort of the underlying structure of strategic management. On top of that is diversity, and then we have our pillars, which is being displayed to you at this time. Hopefully the display is easy to understand. If there's any questions that you have, I would be happy to answer them. One question that I've had on this diagram is who's customers? Why is HR dealing with customers? And I would probably say that the biggest issue that I would probably say with us is that we need to start looking at the stuff that we're doing for other people as sort of a service. So my customers are the CEO, they're the other department heads who are actually working for the organization, and then also some of my customers, I would say actually one of my favorite customers are usually the employees. We're there to help them out, make sure that they've got everything set up and everything's taken care of. So now that we've kind of moved along with that, we were talking about, we talked about the selection process in the last video, and what's happened is after we did the selection process, remember we offered them the salary, and I kind of told you that the first place I would start is offer them the benefits first and then give them the salary number, because then you have their full attention until you have fully divested yourself of everything that you need to say. But this is where we're going to kind of talk about what goes into that salary or into that that compensation package, and the buzzword of the day, of course, is total rewards. And that's kind of the concept that we have, that move away from salary. Some of you guys that are in the military, you probably remember, I remember they did this back in, I think it was like 2004, 2005, where you could go in your DFAS and you could click on something and it would tell you, hey, if you left the military, this is what your package that you have being in the military is worth. So you would have kind of a comparison. And they would give you, like a list of your health benefits and how much value that is. They would give you a list of your dental benefits, how much value that is. 401k, which for military would be TSP, and how much the value of that is compared to a 401k outside in the civilian world. And then, of course, the pension, the value of that. So there's sort of this thing that they were kind of trying to do in order to, and it was a retention tool. They were trying to convince people, because the first thing that a lot of people say is, well, I'm in the military, I'm making 60 grand a year, but if I go out of the military, I'm going to make 80 grand a year working for this company over here. And so what would end up happening is people would go do that, and then they'd realize about 2 months into it, they'd be like, yeah, I'm not making as much money as I thought I was, because your retirement plan now has to be fed by you. Your medical plan, sometimes you're paying part of the medical insurance costs. And so there's a whole wide range of things that need to be kind of taken into consideration when you're doing that. Getting back to so the people who are not in the military and all the rest of us out here. So you want to develop a compensation plan that includes salary, health benefits, 401k plans, but you feel it might be better to start to meet the needs of your employees by making some changes to those existing plans. One of the problems that you're going to run into, especially if you're making changes to compensation, is that you're always going to run the risk that the other employees are either going to be jealous or they're grandfathered in, which is going to cause your new employees to be jealous. When I was in the before I joined the military, I worked at a hotel. It's now DoubleTree. I talked about it in one of my previous videos. But we voted to deunionize, and I don't want to talk about that too much here. I'll talk about it when we start talking about unions later on. But one of the factors of it was starting salaries for us continued. I mean, we were grandfathered in. However, starting salaries for the new people who showed up was different. Even though they got somewhat, there was better benefits being offered because of, the company offered really good benefits, but the pay was less. So, there was a little bit of resentment, I think, when people started figuring out about that who had come to work at the organization. But after about 4 or 5 months, I don't think anybody really cared. In this section, we're going to be looking at goals of a compensation plan, and the objectives of this section is actually pretty obvious. They're going to be to explain the goals of a compensation plan. So first of all, when we start looking at some of this, and we've kind of talked about it in the past, I won't get too much into it, but obviously when we talk about the strategic plan, one of the things that we will say needs to get translated up is how that strategic plan fits into your compensation plan. So a very good example, if you work for a company that sees itself as taking care of people, you probably want a compensation plan that does something similar to that. And when I'm saying compensation, I'm talking total compensation, not just salary. So for example, instead of paying people a huge amount of money, you might offer a better health insurance plan. You might offer on-site daycare. You might offer certain other things that offer some ideas to the fact that, you are a person, you're a company that sort of provides itself under the compassion. And so, or you might do the 401k plan or a cash paid money pension plan, which is kind of a blend between, it's basically a self-funded pension plan that you can do. So there's different ways that you can actually do that. I'm just thinking of one right off the top of my head, because I always keep talking about, I have awesome benefits and not so much worry about the pay. One example of where you might want to have awesome pay but not as much good benefits would probably be in the area of sales. And the reason why is because you want people to have the financial incentives to go out there and constantly be pushing and pushing and pushing to be able to get the sales. And a lot of people who work in sales, financial rewards tend to benefit them. And it's just the personality type that they have. And that's why when you take a look at, for example, car dealerships who hire salespeople, they do their compensation plans. It's a little different because some of them work on 1099 and some of them, of course, are working as W-2s. But generally, the compensation is going to run, solely focus around the idea that they want to make financial incentives. And so it's not going to be great benefits, but at the same time, you're going to make tons of good money. And so sometimes that makes up for a lot of that stuff. One of the things they do down here is that they talk about the World at Work Society of Certified Professionals. There's a few of these that down here. I actually looked into these probably about 10 years ago. I decided not to do them because back then they were about $1,000 a piece. But if you're going to work in the area of compensation or benefits, I would say that you're probably going to have to look towards these certifications at some point, because what you're going to find out is that as you are trying to secure job opportunities, you're going to be competing with some people that are going to be CCPs and CBPs. So they said, and they have down here where it involves multiple choice exam. They also talk a little bit, I thought the last time I did one, or was looking at one, there was some, you had to submit work that showed what you had done or something of that nature. If you're interested in it, there's a World at Work website, and you can go ahead to that and look for more information. So, they talk about here the certification or based on aspects. It includes the goals of the compensation package for employees, which is the focus of the selection. The goal of the compensation employee, first, the compensation package should be positive enough to attract the best people for the job. And the question of the day is going to end up being, what is the definition of the best people for the job? That is totally up to whatever your organization does. So for example, in the accounting industry, we tend to want to find people who are very detail oriented, but generally and for the most part, I would say the typical accountant is a very conservative person. And I don't mean that in like a political sense. I'm talking more, they're very risk adverse. I think would probably be the way that I would put it. And because they're risk adverse, they're probably not so uber eager to make tons of money, but they're more likely to want to be taken care of. And so, a compensation package that's is going to attract those kind of people, generally is probably going to have those kind of characteristics to it. You need to have that, and then the second one, once the employees come work for the organization, want the compensation to be competitive enough to motivate them. So it's a retention tool too. And we haven't talked too much about retention in this in this class yet, but I'm sure that it'll come up throughout the entire time that we're talking here, and then in different chapters. Third, compensation can be used to improve morale, motivation, and satisfaction among employees. I'm a little skittish on this one. Generally speaking, in my personal opinion, and this is just me personally, if you give somebody simply cash for doing a good job, I've not seen as positive of a as a result of it as would be seen. Now, that could also depend. I mean, obviously, if you're talking about giving compensation, like bonus compensation to a salesperson for the idea that they've done, some kind of good work for you, that is a completely different environment that it is. But generally speaking, when I've worked with within organizations, most of the organizations I've worked with, I've seen where the organization likes to tailor the bonus or the prize or the reward that they're going to give somebody towards something that's is either part of the organization, or two, it's going to be something that kind of relates to the reward to the behavior that they saw. So, for example, if somebody does a really good job and they put in 3 weeks of 80-hour weeks, and normally they work 40. But there's this one project that we really have to get done for this person, and they got to work double time practically in order to get it done. I've seen where what they've done is that they'll come back to that employee and they'll say, we're going to give you an entire week off, paid vacation, not hit on your PTO, go get lost for an entire week. Okay, we're not going to call you. So it sort of relates to you worked really hard, you didn't have a life for 3 weeks, so we're going to let you go do whatever you need to in order to go get your life back and get everything back in order. And I've also seen where they've done it where they've done vacations for people, or they've said, look, the number one person who, and I worked for a blood bank once that talked a little bit about this. And if there were certain things that they tried to achieve, if you were able to achieve your goals, they would give you a vacation. So you could take a vacation voucher and say, and it was usually where I think back then it was like $1,500. So you could take that vacation voucher and you could say, okay, I'm going to use this vacation voucher. I'm going to go on this vacation to this place. Now, if you wanted to go to Cancun instead, you just paid the difference. And so it was a good thing for the employees. So I'm a little bit skittish on the idea of simply improving morale. Satisfaction, maybe. Morale, I've not seen too much of in my personal experiences. And the final thing that they say in this section is that HRM has been a strategic focus, and the same should be true for the development of the compensation packages. Again, everything that you're doing for your compensation plan should tie back to your strategic plan and how that works for the organization. And again, if you are the CEO, you should be out there selling the strategic plan all the time, and then your compensation manager should be talking about that also as compensation is constantly addressed. This section, we're going to talk about developing compensation packages. The overall learning objectives for this is to be able to explain the internal and external considerations of a compensation package and know how to develop compensation philosophy. All right. So a few aspects that they want to talk about, before beginning work on your compensation package, and analysis has to be done to determine your organization's philosophy in regards to compensation. I've kind of been alluding to that throughout today's talk, And what we want to do is we want to design a compensation package that kind of fits into who we are. It needs to be culturally sound, for example. I keep talking about this third accounting firm that I went to go work for, a few years back. I really enjoyed working there, and one of the things that they did is that they are very, very competitive in the benefits area, but not so much in the money area, and that fits into their philosophy. They tend to be a firm that really cares about their employees and cares about the state of the world. A lot of people go work there because they do a lot of nonprofit stuff. And so as a result of that, there's a lot of people who work for the organization, not simply, they get to do accounting, which is what they've been trained to do, but it's really a place where they, because they're working with nonprofits, they kind of feel like they're doing the whole change the world thing that the youth today seem to really enjoy. I really enjoyed working out there because I thought they took very good care of me. All the people were very, very nice. As opposed to some of the accounting firms that I worked for, they tend to be more sales. And so if you weren't, top of the line and best friends with the partner, they wanted nothing to do with you. And so that was kind of a little bit difficult to the perspective. But they give you about 7 different things to really consider. From the employee's perspective, what is a fair wage? Fair wage is it's a very relativistic term, and you really only are going to understand this if you are constantly engaging in discussions with your employees. Okay, so you really want to figure out from them what that, and generally speaking, if you do salary research, and I always recommend doing salary research, salary.com, I love it. I actually use it a lot myself. You want to be a little careful about it because sometimes what ends up happening is, what we've noticed is that salary.com tends to be slightly inflated. Not by much, maybe like 5%. So you want to kind of be a little bit careful about that. Are wages too high to achieve the financial health of your organization? Obviously, if you overpay your employees and you kill the company, nobody's going to succeed and nobody's going to be happy with that. And if your employees, and this gets back kind of more to the servant leadership type stuff and the employee respect. If you've earned your employees respect and you come to them and say, look, this is our P&L from last year. We are in the red by $100,000. For a company my size, that would be really a bad situation. I can't continue paying you the way that we've been paying you. Are people willing to take pay cuts? And there's going to be a few people who are going to come to you and say no. And then there's other people who are going to be willing to take that in exchange for something further down the line once the organization recovers from this. And so again, if you get a lot of buy-in from your employees and they understand that you have their best interests at heart, sometimes you get them to stick around with you even in the hard times when you need to deal with some stuff. Do managers and employees know and buy into your company's philosophy? That's kind of what I was just saying. Does the pay scale reflect the importance of various job titles within the organization? And we haven't really talked too much about pay range, but generally what's going to happen is every position in your organization is going to have a pay range. Okay, and essentially what it is, the pay range is going to be sort of the range that you're going to offer for that position. These are never disclosed outside the HR office, and the reason why is because every employee knows how they got their own salary through their own negotiation, and of course we want to, from the company's perspective, we want to get that as low as possible, but at the same time, we want our employees taken care of. So it is very important that the pay system, the pay range is actually developed. And I always say, use market research. Market research will give you a pretty good idea as to what you should be setting your pay ranges at. Is your company compensation good enough to retain employees? This is where you do a retention analysis, and that's where you start to say, okay, in these positions, this is what my turnover rate is. And then I can compare that to what the industry average is. And if my industry average is that my turnover rate is much higher, then maybe there's something I need to investigate. Very good example. I used to work for several accounting firms. Like I said, 5 accounting firms, including my own. And the average turnover in this industry is about 3 years. Okay, so every 3 years you're going to turn over. So if I'm turning over employees every 5 years, I'm probably doing pretty good stuff to keep people in my organization. If my turnover rate is, say, 2 years, I probably want to sit down with people, and you should do this anyways, but I want to sit down with them at the exit interview and say, may I ask why you're leaving? I mean, I just need to know just so that I can make sure that I'm doing the right thing for people. And they'll probably, and if they're leaving, they'll probably come right out and tell you, I don't think you pay enough. You know, you're stingy. And, you know, we see you playing golf all the time, and meanwhile, we're eating ramen noodles. You know, that's probably something that you want to know. State and local laws being met with your compensation package. We talk a lot about federal laws in this class. But you really, once you get into the organization, you really want to, and this is where I always recommend, join your local SHRM chapter, join SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management. I really highly recommend that. I've been a member for years, and I've actually joined the CFGI, which is the Council for Global Immigration. I do a lot of really cool stuff with them, and so the goal is to get involved with those organizations and continue learning. The seventh thing that they talk about is your compensation philosophy keeping in line with labor market changes, industry changes, and organizational changes. So, for example, you know, we talk a lot about labor market. In the accounting industry, one of the things that we are struggling with in the tax accounting industry, we have an extremely tight labor market here in the Washington, D.C. metro area. So attracting good talent, keeping good talent is something that's always constantly a focus within our industry. So, but a very good example, say for example, our industry is doing well, but other industries may not be doing so well. And so the economy, say for example, is in a recession, but people are always going to need tax services, so we're not going down anytime soon. We may have to thin ourselves out a little bit, but for the most part, the tight labor market can hold up as a result of this. My attitudes in a recession might change because my wife gets laid off. So now all of a sudden, my company, which I didn't really need to have a certain, didn't need to have certain elements within my compensation package, now that my wife doesn't have a job and now doesn't have the ability to take those elements that she was getting from her job, now I might need them in my job. That's a change. And that's a change as a result of labor market changes or industry changes. Another thing that could end up happening is you get organizational changes. For example, in the accounting industry, we have partner turnover. If a partner leaves, and that partner was the one that was kind of the proponent of a specific philosophy, he's no longer there or she's no longer there. Guess what you have to do? You have to, that's going to be an organizational change that you're going to have to deal with. Some compensations may include the following: higher salaries or lower salaries, depending on the location of the business. For example, surgeons are paid in the north central states $537,000, then paid higher than in Hawaii, which is $250,000. Reasons include cost of living area and fewer qualified people in a given area, giving them leverage to ask for the higher salary. I almost don't buy that $250,000 salary, only because I've done enough Hawaiian tax returns and I know the cost of living out there is pretty darn high. But that's what they're saying in 2011. I'll go ahead and I'll buy it. But again, and I kind of talked about this in one of my videos where I had a person who offered me a position. They offered me a salary. And if I haven't told you the story, I'm going to blow through it, but I'm not doing that intentionally. But I just don't want to eat up too much time. But they had offered me a salary, and they gave me the compensation research that they had done, and the salary they were offering was correct. It was the nationwide average salary for what the accounting position that I was going to be hired for was. There's a local market multiplier rate that they forgot to apply, and so as a result of that. Obviously here in the Washington, D.C. area, it would have been a much higher number. So there are, things that you need to take into account when you're doing compensation policies. Should there be specific pay for each position in the organization, or should salaries be negotiated on an individual basis? This is a big philosophy. There are some people one of the arguments that they say with women in having lower salaries is because they say that men are much more aggressive in negotiating their salary. I've seen mixed research on that. I'm not so sure I'm 100% there. I used to be, but I'm not as 100% there as I used to be in the past. But here's the thing. One of the things that they've thought of as a way to end this is just stop negotiating salaries. I'm a little... See, and here's the problem that I have with stopping negotiating salaries. That makes the assumption that everybody who's coming into the organization offers the exact same amount of skills that's necessary for the organization. When you are looking at the fact that, and I think a very good example is in the accounting industry. I may have, so say for example, I have 10 years of experience in the accounting industry. And there's another person that's being considered that has 10 years of experience in the accounting industry. My accounting industry experience is very broad, and so as a result of which I have a wide range of skills. And I have a lot of experience doing a lot of things, but not a whole lot of experience doing one thing. And then you have this other person who's worked 10 years in the construction industry, and that's all he's done. And we're going to go work for a firm that does a whole lot of everything. Okay, they do construction, but then they also use the general skills that I'm going to use. Okay, so if we're going to examine that, what ends up happening is, how am I going to determine who's more valuable? Okay, and it's always facts and circumstances. So I think that if you're going to sit there and try to have a one-size-fits-all policy for everybody, it's going to be hard. Now, if I'm working in the manufacturing organization, for example, and I want to hire 10 people who are going to be doing the exact same type of job, and the only reason why I'm hiring them is to do this one type of action that they're going to be doing the whole time, and it doesn't really requires that I have to train them up in order to be able to do it, maybe more likely to do. Another example is minimum wage labor. Working at McDonald's, you probably don't have a whole lot of negotiating power when you go start to work at McDonald's. I don't care if you have a bachelor's degree, I don't care if you have a college degree or whatever. If you're working at McDonald's, they're going to be like, look, we expect you to flip burgers, we expect you to make burgers, we expect you to sell burgers, and that's it. And they're not going to have a whole lot of negotiating power. So I'm still out to lunch as to whether we should be doing this or not, but I don't know. What's the balance of salary and other rewards, such as bonuses? There's some people that are like, hey, look, you can give me a lower salary, but just give me a share of the company profits at the end of the year. Some people are very excited to do that. And it motivates some people in order to do more for the organization than they would otherwise. Most of the experience that I have tend to be at lower risk organizations, so people don't probably want that too much. But I think that there's definitely a market out there. I mean, I do a lot of work in stock options and equity compensation, and so in the equity compensation areas, they're very happy, and I could see why. I've had people who have ballooned their paychecks by up to 3 times because of equity compensation. So I could see how it could be a very motivating factor. When giving raises, will employees' tenure be a factor, or will pay increases be merit-based, or a combination of both? Generally in the industry, it's always a combination of both. However, if a person's stagnant in one position for a long time, it's probably going to hurt them. They talk about internal and external pay factors. The major one, of course, is the compensation strategy that we do. Some companies want to choose a market compensation policy, which is market plus or minus philosophy. Market compensation is to pay the go rate for a particular job within the market, and based on research and salary studies. That's what I always kind of recommend, because it's more, I think it's dispassionate, but at the same time, I think you're going to have a better chance of retaining many more of your employees, or attracting new employees if you're willing to meet or match what the going rate or going philosophy is. Then they give you kind of an example of the University of Arizona. An example of an organization with a market plus is Cisco Systems, and they kind of talk a little bit about that. I'm not going to go too much into that and let you guys do that on your own. An example of a market minus would be Whole Foods. is a little dated. Ever since the Amazon takeover, I go to Whole Foods frequently. I'm a big fan of their. I love steaks. I don't think there's any secret to that. It's probably half the reason why I got the monster down here. But I love their ribeyes are phenomenal. I don't care if I grill it. I don't care if I fry it. I'm a Gordon Ramsay fan too. And I know a lot of people who know that, Gordon Ramsay likes to use a lot of butter and stuff, and I can kind of understand why. But so I go there and I would talk to the employees I've got a pretty good rapport with, and I would actually talk to them and say, how are things going, blah blah blah. And so I've been kind of following what's going on with them ever since the Amazon takeover, and for the most part, most of them are pretty happy. There were concerns when they initially took over that Amazon was going to be like, hey, look, we're gonna we're gonna mess up the business significantly. I mean, one of the things that I like about it personally, as an Amazon Prime member, I can save money when I go out there. But more importantly, Amazon, once they came in, they started dropping the prices of a lot of food that I think was artificially raised just because they wanted to keep the elite status of hanging out at Whole Foods, which I'm a little concerned about on that sense. But and they said, so yeah, and so they kind of talk a little bit about this, and I'll let you guys read that. External pay factors can include economic state. In 2011, I can't believe, now that we're in almost 2019, and but good Lord, talk about a complete change of facts. 2011, the U.S. unemployment rate was 9.2%. And now I haven't even been following it in the past year or so, but I know it's very, very low. We're starting to get a lot of market tightening, and as a result of a lot of the market tightening, we're actually starting to see wages actually go up, which is phenomenal. I'm very happy with that. Okay, so in this section, we're going to talk about types of pay systems, and the types of pay systems, and then the learning objectives for this are explain the types of job evaluation systems and their use, be able to define, discuss the pay systems factors determining the type of pay and system used, and know the laws related to compensation. All right, so once you decided your compensation strategy, and you will focus on the need to evaluate jobs, develop a pay system, blah, blah, blah. 6.2, they go over this, and this is where, and I really wish I could copy this and put this on the screen for you guys. I think that there's a lot of, this is a great system that they've done with this, where they talk about compensation and external factors, take the job evaluation, type of pay system, types of pay, legal pay theories, and then you got your implementation of compensation strategy. This is a pretty good model to be following when you're doing a lot of that. Several ways to determine the value of the job through job evaluation. Again, I've always been a big market research kind of guy. And I don't think this, and look, set aside for 5 seconds about the HR thing. Let's talk about you when you leave this program and you decide that you're going to go off and get your own job. It's very, very important that you do your own market research. Okay, I like salary.com in one sense that you can go, you pay $49 and you download and you can get the salary that you need for the organization that you, or for the industry that you want to work in. I think it's very important because there's, I've noticed when we do salaried negotiations within an organization, one of the biggest things that I notice, and again, I know we're kind of going back to chapter 3 when I was talking about power. There's a perceived power when you're doing salary negotiation. The company holds all the cards. Believe me, they want you as much as you want them at that point. You guys, by saying we want to hire you, this is the salary that we're going to offer you, this is the compensation package we're going to offer you. They have said that they want you. Now, they may have a bottom price that they're willing to pay, a max price they're willing to pay, but you need to be able to go in there with the market research and realize when somebody's lowballing you. And if I wasn't keeping up on research, when the person offered me that ridiculously low salary to go work with them, I might have taken it not knowing any better. Okay, so I didn't do that, and I was very, and I'm probably much happier as a result of it. So they talk about several ways to do a job. Yeah, so let's get back to the HR side. And I'm hoping I'm going to talk a little bit about more individual type stuff when we get done with this. Paired compensation can also occur where job individuals are compared with other jobs, ranking systems. Yeah, and this is where they kind of talk about the evaluations of the jobs. I'm not going to get too much into this, just because I think that they do a pretty good job of explaining it here. They talk about a job classification system here, which is based on, is grouped and based on knowledge and skills required for the job, years of experience, amount of the authority for that job. The military, yeah, definitely. Although one thing I don't like about your book is they do not capitalize N for Navy. Sad. And then they, one of the things they talk about is very horrible for us veterans. One of the worst things that happens with us veterans is when we sit down and watch movies. Because when I sit down and I watch a movie, the first thing I want to say is, that guy's uniform is wrong, that guy's saluting wrong, that guy does this wrong. Looking in this book, this is the one thing that drives me nuts about this book. When they talk about HM is not referred to as a hospitalman, they're referred to as a corpsman, which don't get me started. But they do talk about how they do the job specialties. So, one of the things, I would say that the Navy is probably the best for this. And other military services like to make fun of us because for the enlisted, again, the guys who join and go off after high school, their rank is actually based on their rate, which is what their job is. So a very good example, I said the HMs. If a person is an HM, we call them a corpsman. Okay. Another good example, when I used to fly, I used to have AWs that would fly with me. And now the Navy's outdone this whole thing where now, of course, they don't even have flight engineers anymore, but when they had flight engineers, they changed them from what their rates were to this new rate. These guys take this very, very personally, and they're very proud of their rates that they have. So a very good example, the aviation warfare people, those are the people who on the airplane, they're monitoring the radar, they're monitoring the sonar in order for us to be able to track submarines. And so they would have a job classification code for that. Now nobody they wouldn't refer to themselves by their job classification code, but they would refer to them by their rates. And so the federal government, though, does have the job specialties, the job specialization codes they would put in. And, they have it here where there's they have it divided into specialties. They use HM-8483, which is a classification for a surgical technologist, HM-8451, which is a corpsman X-ray technician, and so on and so forth. And then the University of Washington also has a really good one too. And this one with them, at the University of Washington, of course, you have unions that kind of get involved that you have to go through. So I'll let you take a look at that. It's very interesting. Gosh, I'm getting all the way down there. Okay. Another job evaluation system is a point factor system, which determines the value of a job by calculating the total points assigned to it. And so what they end up doing here is they use and they give you an example where they talk about knowledge, autonomy, supervision, psychological demands, interpersonal skills, and internal and external contacts. And so this point factor system autonomy ranks highest and is given the weight of 29, while the knowledge area is given a rate of 20, for example. And then each of the compensating factors has a narrative that explains how points should be distributed for each factor. I never used this, obviously. This one I've never used when determining compensation. I mean, I guess it makes sense. To me, I think, I tend to, one of the things I did learn about the Navy is not to overanalyze everything, and I think the point system for this, that we can tend to do that a little bit. But that's okay. Now we're going to talk about the Hay profile method. It's a proprietary job method that focuses on 3 factors called know-how, problem solving, and accountability. Again, this isn't one that I've used personally, but I do think it's it's just another way of doing things. Again, since I've never used it, I'm not going to talk about it. now we're going to talk a little bit about pay systems. Once you perform the job evaluation, you can move into the third step, which is called pay grading. The federal government does this pretty well. And what they do is that they, and all you guys who work in the federal government, you're kind of like, okay, yeah. All I need to know is what your grade is, and I need to know what step you are, and I can tell what you make, generally on a base level. Now, there's additional factors that go into it. For example, if you are say you're a GS 15 step 2, yes, your base salary would, under this system, effective on 2011, would be $102,949. However, there are locality differences, and then there's other differences that can be thrown into it. So, they talk about this where they talk about U.S. locations receive a base adjustment ranging from 14.16% to 35.15%. And obviously, the closer that you live to higher concentration areas, the higher the rate is. So I know, like Washington, D.C. area, it's going to be a big boost compared to, say, for example, Abilene, Texas. So the first method is the variety of pay grades. We also do this in the military too. I mean, if I want to know how much money you make generally, all I need to know is your rank and how long you've been in the service. And I can figure out pretty much what you're making in terms of base pay. Now, of course, there's other types of pay, for example, aviation pay, hazard duty pay, family separation pay. There's different types of pay that they do that can comprise of your salary. So. And I love how they do this. Again, I'm from Spokane, Washington, so I love how they use Spokane, Washington as an example. And that the cost of living in Spokane, Washington is much lower than New York City. I can tell you from personal experience, it is. I've been to New York City more than a few times, and I've also been to Spokane, Washington. Like I said, I lived there for almost 10 years. So the cost of living there is very, very low. But other things in that nature. So one of the downsides to pay grading is the possible lack of motivations to work harder. They tried to fix this, and look, I don't want to start a political fight with everybody here. I remember when the Bush administration came in back in 2001, they tried to move from the GS schedule to another schedule where they offered incentive pays. It didn't work out very well. I mean, some people thought it was wonderful, and then there's other people who thought it was horrible. And again, it's not really a zero-sum game. Some people really benefited as a result of it, and some people did not benefit at all. Some people that I talked to about it said that they felt it encouraged favoritism a lot more. I think, anybody, and again, look, I'm not trying to say whether it was the best idea or not. I didn't live in that system, so I don't feel like I have the right to judge the system. I'm only telling you the things that I've heard. However, I do know that we went back to the GS system recently, earlier in this decade, and so. I know, but as I recall, they did try to keep some of the elements of the incentive pay system, and so they're trying to fight some of that, the disincentive to work harder as those kind of systems have. Okay, so they also talk about, in addition to pay level models, which they looked at, other considerations might include the following: skill-based pay, competency-based pay, broadbanding, which is similar to a pay grade system, except all jobs in a particular category are assigned a specific pay category. So, for example, everyone working in consumer services or administrative assistants are paid the same within the same general band. This is the broadbanding is actually something they talk about on the PHR exam, if that's something that you're interested in doing. I just want to make sure that you guys understand that broadbanding was, I do remember, was something that they talked about when I was studying for it. I can't remember if it showed up on my exam or not, but they change all the time, so I wouldn't rely on that anyways. This type of system, okay, so variable pay system, which provides employees with a pay basis, but then links it to attainment of certain goals. When I worked in the Navy on the Admiral staff, we tried to do this thing called whole goals. And so what would happen is you would choose the goals that you would have for your organization. What would happen is the Admiral would choose his whole goals. And then based off his whole goals, the Chief of Staff would choose their whole goals. Because one time we had a man, one time we had a woman. Once they chose their whole goals, people underneath them would then choose their whole goals. And then the people underneath them would then choose their whole goals. And what it tried to do, in theory, you were linking yourself all the way up to the admiral's goals. So if I met my goals, chances are I was supporting his goals, because the admiral was a gentleman back then. That I would say it kind of worked out in theory. But one of the things that they had kind of talked about was that they were going to use some of the incentive pays that I was talking about earlier to compensate people if they met their whole goals. And so that's something that doesn't, I mean, I don't know if I would bring the concept of whole goals into the private sector. I might, or I might do something similar to it, but then, have it to where, you could do certain variable pay systems based on the achievement of those goals. I think it's, I mean, look, and like, again, I don't want to talk politics, but I think variable type pay systems sometimes can be like communism. It's great in theory, horrible in practice. So I tend to be one of those people that, you can try and make it work. I've not seen a system too much that I've been too impressed with, but that's just me. So then they talk about pay theories. The equity theory is concerned with the relationship, the relational satisfaction employees get with the pay and inputs they provide to the organization. So it says, people will look at their own compensation packages and their own inputs and compare that with others. If they perceive it to be unfair, then another person is paid more, but then they believe that the person is doing less work. So for example, and I'm sure all of us have had this happen before. You've worked in the organization and you're working hard, and the person maybe next to you is not working at all. And, every time you come in, after, you go to lunch, you spend 30 minutes at lunch because the company tells you only spend 30 minutes. Or they tell you to spend an hour, you want to come in 30 minutes so that you can get some work done. And you come back and you see that the person is, not doing their work, but instead reading the news on the internet or watching Netflix or something of that nature on the internet. And then you find out later on that the individual next to you is actually making more money than you are. That will chafe your employees very quickly. Now, that's a pretty blatant example. But say, for example, something a little bit less blatant, both of us are working hard, both of us have similar outputs, but I find out the person next to me is making something in the neighborhood of, $10,000 more than I am. That to me does not seem like an equitable situation. Okay, this is one reason why a lot of HR, and I'm going to tell you, this is something that's a little controversial. Some HRs make it a company policy that you cannot discuss your salary with anybody else. I have heard from several lawyers that is a policy that is impossible to enforce. Okay, my personal, because some people want to say it's freedom of speech. You can say whatever you want, but some people look at it as a company secret. I'm mixed issues on this. I think, I wouldn't tell anybody my salary that I'm making currently. It doesn't matter because I'm the only employee in my company, so nobody cares. But the fact of the matter is there are, you kind of want it not to be a discussion issue. I don't know though. There's a portion of me that almost wonders if everyone knew everyone's salary, maybe we'd get better pay equity. Not that I think that's fair, that's good for the company, but I definitely wonder if it might be more equitable in the other areas. Again, these are theories. We try to look into them when we're doing this, but again, the biggest problem that I have with the equity theory is define fair for me. What's fair? I work in the accounting industry, and we have in the United States what we refer to as a progressive tax system, which basically means that if I make $10,000 a year, I'm probably going to be taxed on that $10,000 at 10%. Okay? And I'm ignoring a whole lot of deductions and things of that nature that people will get. Generally in the United States, now, especially under the new tax laws, if you make $10,000, you're not paying anything in tax. As I don't believe you should, because I don't think you'd be able to afford it. But if I make $300,000 and I'm single, I'm probably paying a max, or close to a maximum tax rate, which would be, I think actually in that pay range, I'd probably be at about 35%. So there's this curve that goes up as it does that. Some people say that's fair, and the theory behind the progressive tax system is that as I make an additional dollar, the value of that next dollar that I make is less valuable to me. So for example, if I have $20 in my pocket, or we'll say, or $20 in my hand, and I have two people that I'm going to go to and I'm going to ask them to do me a favor. I need a cup of coffee. Would you run and go grab me a cup of coffee? And I ask a person who's making $10,000 a year, and I make a person who is making $300,000 a year. Who's going to see that $20 is more valuable? The person making $10,000 a year. All right, the person who's making $300,000 a year probably has $20 bills, or no, I wouldn't say $20 bills, but he probably has $20 of change in his cushions in his couch. Okay, not to suggest that it's good or bad or indifferent, but that's kind of the theory that we have. So some people think that's a very fair system. Others do not. Fair is relative. And I deal with clients all the time. I have clients who come into my office, they're millionaires, and they're like, you know what, I don't care. I'm okay paying these taxes. Because the way that I view it is that I'm a pretty lucky person to live in the United States, blah, 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 so on and so forth, they're happy. Then I have other clients in the same situation who they come in and they find out what their tax bill is, and they're like, they're doing all this stuff because they're like, why do I have to pay so much in taxes, blah, 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 blah. Fair is relative. Fair is very relative, and you're going to have to deal with that when you're considering your compensation strategies and philosophies when you're doing your HR stuff. Okay, fairness is not something I think it's hard to hit. The expectancy theory is another theory in relation to pay. The expectancy theory says employees will put in as much work as they expect to receive. So for example, if I'm not paid a whole lot, I'm probably not going to put a whole lot of effort into something. But if I'm paid a whole lot of money, I'll probably put a lot of effort into something. I think there's a law of diminishing returns here. And that's what, like I was saying, there's certain times where you can reward people with money. And I think that sometimes it's helpful, and sometimes I think it kind of falls flat. But that's just my opinion. Again, it's based upon my anecdotal evidence that I have, which is basically everything that I've seen. But the expectancy theory, again, how much they put in, they expect to get out. Reinforcement theory developed by Edward Thorndike says that high performance is followed by some reward, and that desire was likely to recur in the future. It's sort of the Pavlov's dogs type thing. So, Pavlov was the guy who rang the bell with the dogs. And so, in case you don't know this, basically what it is that there was an experiment that every time, Pavlov would ring the bell, he would give the dog a treat. And he did this constantly over time. And then eventually what ended up happening was he would ring the bell and see what the dog's reaction was. Dog reaction is that he's salivating because he's expecting the treat. That's kind of what I think what Edward was trying to get at here. And so, that's a very big theory behind bonuses. Hey, if we give bonuses because of high performance that takes place, we're probably going to get high performance from people going forward. But I would say that under this theory also, the reverse is true. If there's no consequences for bad behavior repeats itself. And so we need to take those things into consideration. Pay decision considerations. Besides the motivational aspect, there's some other considerations. If you're an HR manager for a 10-person company, you're likely to use a going rate or a management fit model. Whereas if the larger your company, the more formal your pay structure is going to be. And I would agree with this. Usually if you're talking about, with my company size, that all of one, it's about hopefully going to go up to 4 here soon. One of the things that ends up happening is we're going to pay based on whatever the market is, if and higher up to what we can afford. that is that, you know, but as the company gets bigger, pay structures get formalized and people move up on that. So then they talk about different types of pay and also communicating your pay system. I'll let you take a look at that in the chart. But after the pay system is developed, we can look at methods of paying the employees. When we talk about compensation, we're not only referring to the actual paycheck, but the additional types of compensation, such as incentive plans and bonuses. So, and this is where it kind of gets into, you know, it's great and wonderful if you have the best compensation package in the world, but if you don't tell everyone about it, so what? People won't know. And then, you know, and you might say, well, when they go off for their things to do negotiations with other people, they're going to realize it. Well, that's not necessarily the case. More likely than not, if your employee is discussing a compensation package with another company, you've already lost them. Okay? They need to know how their pay structure relates to the industry so they can understand the value of it. And I've seen where that actually pays off dividends. Laws relating to pay, as you've learned from other chapters, you can't discriminate against people when it comes to system of pay. I think that's pretty, you know, that's got a very high, what I would call duh factor. However, evidence does show that it's not always the case. They said, you know, this is where I was talking about a woman tends to earn 79 cents for every dollar a man earns. Women of color, the gap is wider at 69 cents for African American women and 59 cents for Latino women. Again, this is the stuff where I would want to look at the devils in the details. And look, as an HR person, you're not expected to go out there and solve the world's problems like that, but you are expected to solve it for your company. And the way that we do that is you have to kind of take, and we kind of talked a little bit about this in the diversity chapter, you kind of have to take a look at your job market that's available to you for the specific jobs that you have and compare that to how your organization fits in with that. And so if you're, you know, if you say I have a company of 5,000 people, of which 2,000 are staff accountants, because I have a big accounting firm. And I would say, if I take a look and I'm only choosing a number that high so that I can get a pretty diverse population. I take a look at the population of people that I could hire from and compare it to the population that I have within my own company. And if I see significant differences, then I need to start considering changes to my policies in order to bring them in line to what the market's got, provided that it's within that same it's within that same area. So these are some of the publications, some of the reasons, and I'm going to let you read those. I'm going to try to get past that. They talk about the Equal Pay Act of '63 makes it illegal to pay different wages to men and women if they perform equal work. The Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009. It amends the Civil Rights Act and states that 180-day statute of limitations for filing equal pay lawsuits with each discriminatory paycheck. And then the Fair Labor Standards Act, FSLA, that actually establishes minimum wage, and it also establishes your overtime requirements. And so if you want to do your exemptions and things of that nature. All right, so under the FLSA, there's in addition to higher minimum wage and of course the hours working, it also talks about child labor. Obviously, that isn't as much of a problem as it was when this was passed back in 1938. There was actually a huge child labor issue, especially with regards to the Depression. A lot of people were hiring kids, so kids weren't going to school, and so it was causing societal issues on different areas. They also talk about tipped employees. So on their FLSA, tipped employees, those earning $30 or more tips, such as those servers in the restaurants, they also have a minimum wage, but it's $2.12 an hour. But you might say, well, that's not a whole lot of money. But what they do is that they then consider the $2.12 an hour, add in all the tips that they get, and bring it in, and that has to be over whatever the minimum wage is for the area. Over the minimum wage for the federal government at this league. States all do minimum wage differently. I know California has a minimum wage. Washington State has a minimum wage. They were talking about making a minimum wage here in Montgomery County to $15 an hour. And then they just passed a law in DC talking about making restaurant workers paid a minimum wage that was significantly higher. And there were there's been some mixed reviews on that. There's some restaurant workers that are like, this is phenomenal. And then there's other restaurant workers that are like, this is going to hurt me. So it's still going into, it was voted in by referendum, but it sounds like the DC government wants to overturn it. It's a huge mess. If you don't live in the Washington, DC area, you probably are like, what the heck's going on there? But that's kind of what that's kind of some of the drama that I've seen with compensation and pay here recently. So they talk a little bit about FUTA down here, and FUTA stands for the Federal Unemployment Tax Act, and that kind of works in conjunction with another group of laws called SUTA, which is State Unemployment Tax Act. So with Federal Unemployment Tax Act, what it does is that they say that I actually do a few tax returns like this, where they calculate, and it's filed by the company once per year. And what the company does is that they pay, each employee is given what they call a base wage, and it's either equal to your pay or $7,000, whichever is lower. Okay, so what happened is then you pay an equitable rate, and I can't remember the rate off the top of my head. I only do about 4 or 5 of these a year. And it's always in January, so I never bother to memorize everything. But what ends up working out to being about $420 per employee. However, they will give you a FUTA tax credit equal to 90% if you pay your SUTA on time. And this is a way that the federal government gets the states to employ SUTA, which is the State Unemployment Tax Act, because the states are the ones that are really supposed to be managing the program. Now, they do receive a portion of this tax that they collect from the employees or from the employers in order to take care of the employee, just in case the SUTA tax isn't paid or if there's been any problems with the SUTA tax. So the federal government does put themselves on the hook a little bit for this. So it's kind of important to follow this. But with SUTA, what happens is you pay into the employer pays into the unemployment insurance, and it's a type of insurance. So if your employee loses their job for anything that's not any fault of their own, they can go on this unemployment and collect unemployment pay while they look for a new job. It helps to kind of mitigate, surprises. I don't have a job anymore, so I need to go out and I need to have money so that I can keep myself funded so that I can go get my new job. I've had this happen to me once before. Maryland is a little bit convoluted, a little difficult in my opinion. But it paid me, I think it was like $495 a week, I believe, while I looked for a job. So it's not bad. Not as much as I was making, but it definitely helps to keep things going while you're looking for your new position. The next law they talk about, the Federal Employees Compensation Act, which provides federal employees injured in the performance of their jobs compensation benefits, including disability. Please note that this is an elective for private companies, but required of federal agencies. And to be honest, most time when I've seen most companies are going to offer a type of disability insurance for their employees, just because it's usually a benefit in the benefit package. You'll have short-term disability insurance, which usually covers for 6 months. The first 6 months, and usually what they'll do is they'll give you 100% of whatever it is that you've been making. I had this happen to somebody I know when I was working at my last firm before I went into private practice for myself. He was walking the downstairs holding his child, tripped, and tried to spin to take care of the kid, which luckily he did. But when he spun to take care of the kid, he twisted and basically snapped his ankle. He said he heard this snap. So he was in a cast. He wasn't able to work. He was on drugs, so obviously they weren't going to have him doing tax returns. That's just a bad combination. So he ended up, going on short-term disability for a month and a half while he healed his leg. still got his pay. He was not allowed to work. His job was to be in bed and get better. So it worked out very well for him. Had he hurt something where he had to be out of work for, say, a year, short-term disability will cover him for the first 6 months, and then generally the next 6 months they're going to put him on what's called long-term disability. Now each policy is different, but generally the way that I've seen is that long-term disability pays at 60%. So if you're on long-term disability for, say, a year, they're not going to give you 100% of your salary, but they're going to give you 60% of your salary as you are going through convalescence. And it's I mean, if you think about, I had somebody that I knew once that did have this happen to them, and they received long-term disability. He said a lot of his expenses actually went down, so it almost made up for it. Not that I'm trying to make light of it, but it was definitely it wasn't as bad. You hear 60%. I'm thinking to myself, can I live on 60% of what I make? And the answer is, you might think it's hard, but if you're not, driving everywhere and, and doing all this stuff, but going through convalescence, it doesn't take as much. But the good news is they'll cover you, and then the company, of course, you're still an employee of the company, so you usually get covered on your benefits. That you got to pay for whatever you have to pay for, but that's that is what it is. Anyways, I could talk about that for the next 10 hours if given the opportunity, but I'm not going to, because I want to wrap up the video pretty quickly here. So in this section, we're going to talk about other types of compensation. And the learning objective here, of course, is explain the various types of benefits that can be offered to employees. And when I first learned about this, I've never really considered Medicare and Social Security as a benefit to the employee, but if you think about it, it is. Now, it's one that they pay for. The way that the way that it originally was built was the idea that you would pay this thing called the payroll tax. It is 15.3%, of which 12.6% of it is for Social Security, and 2.9% of it is for Medicare. The Medicare tax has no limits. It's a flat tax. So if anybody asks in the United States, do we have a flat tax in the United States? We actually do. It's called the Medicare tax. Social Security tax is actually capped out at an annual limit. I think last year it was $127,900. It changes every year, so most of us accountants don't memorize the number. We memorize it during tax season, and then after that, it's like we ram dump it. But you will pay 12.6% of your salary up to that Social Security maximum, and then after that, every dollar after that is not taxed anymore. Why they did that is I could go into it, but I'm not going to, because it's not really that important. The Social Security, actually there is one thing I want to talk about. So I said it's 15.3% total, but it's not paid all by one person. One half of it is paid by the employer at 7.65%, or 6.2% for Social Security tax and 1.45% for Medicare tax, and the other half is paid for by the employee. So when you take a look at your W-2s as you get them, you're going to have 6 boxes. You have box 1, wages, which is your federal tax wages. You have box 2, which is your federal income tax withholdings. Box 3, which is your Social Security wages. Your box 5 is your Medicare wages, and then box 4 and 6 corresponding to the various taxes, respectively, of Social Security and Medicare. So you actually pay this. Now, you don't probably feel it because it's all taken out and you don't even think anything of it. But when you're ever looking at your pay stub and you're like, who's this idiot FICA that keeps taking my money and why do I never meet them? I remember when I was a kid and I got my first paycheck, I'm like, who's FICA? Why are they taking my money? That's what that is. So then it's done by the Social Security Act, requires employers to withdraw funds from the employee's paycheck to pay for retirement benefits. We now call this OASDHI, OASDHI. I've never called it that, as you can tell. It did not roll off my tongue. But old age survivors disability health insurance program. I would think old age would probably not. I wouldn't use the term old age. I'd be shocked if that doesn't cause a diversity issue. Most people, if I told somebody they had old age, they'd probably look at me like, what's wrong with you? But, you know, it's money aside. The thought process is that it's for your... it's for your retirement. Now the thought process is you're going to pay into this, and then when you retire, you're going to get benefits as a result of it. The way it's kind of working out right now is they're just kind of collecting the tax and they're just paying out benefits. They're using it to pay out the benefits of today. One of the problems that they have is that Social Security, when it was initiated, the mortality rate, the average life expectancy of human beings was much lower, and so as a result of which, now we've got people who are traditionally they would be dying in their 60s or 70s, are living to their 80s and 90s, and so as a result of which, it's putting a lot of strain on that system. Another thing is, I don't think we've had a change in rate in years. I don't think there's been, there was one time that they did a tax holiday, but it was for a very small amount of time. I don't know a time when it was anything different than that, but maybe I'm wrong. Then they have the unemployment insurance and workers' compensation. Unemployment insurance, we talked about FUTA. Okay, so they talk about here 0.8% per employee. It's actually 6.2%, but they'll allow credit, and that's what I was kind of talking about, the 90% tax credit. I didn't know it went down to 0.8%, but it's up to a certain base wage, which is about $7,000 as I recall. Now each state, when they do their SUTA, is a different rate. I think DC's $9,000. I think Maryland's $8,000. So it's one of those things. Workers' compensation, I've actually taken the benefit of this. I was working at McDonald's when I was much younger and had hair. But basically what ended up happening was I was walking in front of the grill area, and there had been some grease that fell down from some sausage that we had just made for that morning. I slipped, and next thing I know, and you can't see it here because I thought I'd be able to show it, but I fell on my knee and just went crack. And I'll be fine. Don't worry about it. But luckily, the manager that was on duty, who I didn't think liked me very much, cared enough about me to say, go to the hospital now. And they took care of it. And then they said, Kevin, go home. And then what they did is they ended up paying me while I was at home on convalescence. I think it was on convalescence for like 2 days. And so they took care of me on wages wise. I got better and everything was good. So that's useful. Say it's not a federally mandated program, but some occupations, some states, it may be a requirement. Like I said, when I worked at McDonald's in Washington State, they required it, so I was pretty good. Mandated is COBRA, and no, this is not the enemy organization of G.I. Joe. This is the Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act. I know, well, actually now I guess some of you guys in your 20s may have actually heard of G.I. Joe, now thanks to the movie, although I don't think they did a good job of it. But anyways, so what this allows is that you can extend your group coverage for up to 36 months. It does not require that the employer pay the employer's share of it, though. So you can be offered the same health insurance that you have. The problem that they run into here is, and I think I took COBRA for a month when I was laid off, only because it worked out well for me to do that. And then after the month, I think I didn't do it after that. I don't know, maybe it wasn't a month, maybe it was just a short amount of time. But it's expensive. So sometimes the employee's like, I can't afford it because there's just no other cheaper options or anything like that. If you want to be a good employee or employer, you offer different types of health insurance, and then maybe they can swap to a different health insurance. But I don't know if that would happen. I don't know if that would happen for whatever it is. But if this doesn't just mean if you're terminated, but also a reduction in hours. So if you had 40 hours worth of medical insurance and you were cut to 20 hours and no longer qualifying, COBRA is an option in order to keep your health benefits. Very useful if you don't have a spouse that works that could keep you, it could keep your insurance plan going like I did. But it's something that's definitely there. So then they talk about some voluntary types of pays, incentive pay systems, where they're tied to, directly to business objectives. That was kind of like the whole goals thing that I was talking about, and all that. Employee ownership of the organization through profit sharing. You know, we talk about stock options, and I think, yeah, they don't really. I don't see that they talk too much about the stock options, but and I'll kind of go over them real quickly here. There's different types of stock options. You have what they call non-qualified stock options, which have the least favorable tax benefits. They have what they call incentive stock options, which are a little bit more advantageous. They're not actually as popular as they used to be. And then they have what they call restricted stock units. Non-qualified stock options usually, you know, what they do is that there's a certain portion of it that's taxed at ordinary rates, certain part of it is taxed at capital gains rates. Capital gains rates is a lower rate, usually about half of what you would normally pay. And so it tends to be better, of course, but you know, there's certain qualifications that you have to have. If you ever get into a position where you have stock options, contact the CPA before you exercise them. And I only say this because I've had a couple times where I've had clients that I had a client who came to work with me, and he ended up owing a lot of money because the company didn't withhold enough because he didn't know what he was signing when he did it. I've had two clients who've come to me before they've executed stock options, no problems, because I know what I'm doing with that. And so you want to go to a CPA who can help you navigate that when that happens. So voluntary medical insurance, according to the Bureau of State Labor Statistics, 62% of companies in 2010 offered healthcare benefits to employees. There's a wide variety of healthcare benefits that you can have that you can offer to people, everywhere from offering full-blown insurance that takes care of everything. You can have lower cost insurance that probably takes care of a little less, where the employee has to pay more. Very good example, when I had my health insurance through that company, the third company that I worked at that I was very happy to work with, I think my copay, as I recall, was like $10, $15 for most stuff. It was phenomenal health insurance, and I didn't pay for it. The company paid for it 100% for the employee. That was part of the compensation package. I didn't make as much money there, but that's what they did. You know, another thing that you can do, and this is very particularly helpful for younger people who don't need health insurance as much because they're younger and they're probably not going to the doctor as often. They can do what they call high deductible plans, which then they do a high deductible plan, which is usually, when I say high deductible, I'm talking like $5,000. It's pretty high. But then you can do what's called a health savings account, where you can contribute money into this health savings account, and it earns interest as it earns earnings as it does this. And if you don't go to the health, you can contribute, depending on what kind of a plan you have and how large the plan is, you can contribute money into it. And if you don't use the health insurance, it just continues to grow as you contribute money to it. If you need it all of a sudden, you can pull it out. Obviously, once you hit the $5,000 limit, your health insurance is going to kick in at that point, and then you don't have to worry about it. But it is something that is definitely available out there. I do like how they bring in yearly cost for employee medical insurance averages $95.52 according to the 2009 Towers Perrin survey. If you want to know how much your health insurance that the employer is providing for you, you can actually pull down on your W-2, look for the code DD, DD as in Delta. And that'll actually tell you how much your company is spending on your health insurance for you that you're receiving as a benefit. They are required to put that on your W-2 so that you learn about it. I would recommend actually, taking a look at it and seeing about how that works out. They also talk a little bit here about HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability Accountability Act. HIPAA, the portability portion of it is probably less important for you as HR officers. I mean, it is important, I would be more worried about the divulging or sharing of healthcare information that you may have on the employee. That is huge. It's, you know, for example, we accountants fall under it thanks to with the Affordable Care Act, where you have to report health insurance about people. That's protected information under HIPAA, and I could accidentally violate if I accidentally tell you how much insurance somebody has, or what kind of insurance they have, or what their health and problems are. That's HIPAA protected information. And you need to make sure that you're following HIPAA if that is something that you feel like you're going to be doing. You're likely going to be responsible to choose the plan, and I've already talked a little bit about this. They do, and they talk a little bit more detail than what I did. Fee-for-service plans, health insurance maintenance organizations, HMOs. HMOs, they were very popular, I'd say maybe about 10, 15 years ago. One of the things that's really cool about the HMO is that the concept works that if all of the medical services and the insurance is controlled by one organization, there will be a reduction of costs. And so the idea is that, you know, and I think a very good common one is Kaiser Permanente. Kaiser Permanente, they actually have an HMO plan that you can get into if that's something that you know, you want to offer to your employees. They tend to be a little less expensive. They also tend to be pretty restrictive. They only give you, you know, if I was a member of Kaiser Permanente, generally I would have to choose doctors that they've approved of. Although, I mean, it's a mixed bag. You know, that's not to suggest that Kaiser Permanente has horrible doctors. I would say not. I mean, I've known a couple of my friends who are on HMOs. They think the world of them. You know, it's, you know, they say, you may see, and they say here that a limited number of specialists or physicians, if you have to go outside the plan because they don't offer that, you'll have to pay more out of pocket, but it's still going to be partially covered. It's not like they're going to just totally say, well, if you want to go, you know, oh, you broke your leg, I'm sorry, we don't have an orthopedic specialist for you, but if you want to go out off for your own, you're going to pay for the whole thing on your own. That's not necessarily the case. And it's also dependent upon facts and circumstances. The PPO, which is very common here in the Washington, D.C. metro area, this is, you know, similar to HMOs, but you can go physicians outside the network. You still have to pay a deductible, but there's more freedom to see specialists. My Cadillac plan that I was involved with, the PPO, I got acupuncture covered, which I thought was phenomenal. Never used it, but I could have had it covered if I had a condition where acupuncture was going to be seen as helping it. You know, the things that you want to take into consideration: cost of the plan, type of coverage. And now that I've been a business owner and dealing with it, I've actually not worked in an organization where I was the one choosing the healthcare, but I've had conversations with my payroll people, because I use paychecks, about buying health insurance for my company, and I've been very phenomenally impressed by, you know, they're coming to me saying, look, we're going to buy what's good for you. Now, obviously, they want to sell me a plan. They want to make money off of it. That's not to suggest that they're not thinking of money, but they're very, very helpful in choosing a lot of this. And I think sometimes, you know, because when I can read tax code, but I can't understand a lot of this stuff that they're doing with this. So you kind of have to rely upon that. And you will too, if you're the one who has to choose it. But there's a lot of things to take into consideration. Disability insurance, we talked a little bit about this. I said 60%. They're saying 60, 80%. I've never seen 80%. I would love 80%. Voluntary 401k plans, they're really simplifying things by talking about this, and I guess the fact that a CPA is teaching the course, this is probably where the teacher from hell comes in. 401k plans okay. There's two major categories of retirement plans. The first major category is defined benefit, and then they have defined contribution. A defined benefit plan is basically a plan where, you know, think of the military retirement system. I work on the old system. I work in the military under the old system. I work 20 years. I can retire at 50% of my base pay. and then I get that for forever. It's a defined benefit. And then as I stay longer in the military, I could go all the way up to, I think, 40 years, I think, is when you hit 100% of your base pay. Although getting to 40 years, you pretty much have to be high ranking, because they're not, I think Matt, high tenure for a captain, which was in 06 in the Navy, was 30 years, unless there was some special reason why they wanted to keep you in. But generally speaking, you're still getting 75% of your base pay, so it's not a bad deal. And I'm getting back, okay, defined contribution plan. Sorry, I looked at this and it got my mind moving. So a defined contribution plan is where, the employee and the employer contribute to the plan, but you're not necessarily guaranteed how much money you're going to have when you retire. Now, generally speaking, if you put it in, you leave it alone, you invest it wisely, you'll do fine. Laws of averages and risks and all that sort of stuff generally will do fine. And if anybody suffered as a result of their 401k tanking on them, I'm sorry to hear that. One of the problems that I have with 401k plans, I've noticed that the companies that manage the plans try to set it and forget it, as opposed to constantly talking to the employees and finding out what their needs are. But I also put this on the employee. The employee needs to reach out to them and say, look, I want to sit down and do a financial plan with you. Figure out some stuff and have it go that way. Regardless of whether you do a defined benefit plan or a defined contribution plan, actually, before I go with that, defined contribution plans, they talk about 401ks here, but that's only one type. You can have what's called a simple plan. There's a 401k simple plan. And what the simple plan is, 401ks, you can generally contribute, I believe it's up to $18,000 if you are under the age of 55, and then it's over the age of 55, or I'm sorry, 50. Under the age of 50. If you're over the age of 50, they allow you a catch-up provision of an additional $6,000 per year. So it's $24,000. Those 401k plans, one of the problems that they have with them is that there's a lot of regulatory requirements with them. So, usually larger organizations are going to do them. Now, I use a 401k plan as what I call a solo 401k plan because there's only me. But if I have employees, they're going to be able to contribute into the plan too. Then it will stop being a solo one. It'll become a full-blown one. But what will end up happening is with the 401k plan, there's a lot of stuff that has to be done. You have to do what's called a 5500, which is a tax form that has to be filed every year. And if it's not filed on time, DOL, which is the Department of Labor, which also gets a copy of this, is going to come down crashing hard on you. The IRS, this is probably one areas where the IRS doesn't do as much auditing as DOL does. They probably see that they're doing enough stuff and they kind of leave it alone a little bit, I guess. But DOL is very heavily involved with this and a lot of regulations in order to get it done. So you can do what's called a 401k simple plan, which works the exact same way as a 401k plan does, but there's reduced limits. So I think it's $12,500 is what an employee is allowed to contribute. They're much lower in cost. There's lower regulation, lower red tape. There's a lot of stuff that's really good on it. Also, if you have a significant number of participants in your 401k plan, your 401k plan has to be audited. And actually, my firm, we actually do audits of 401 of those kinds of retirement plans. And so it's something that we tend to spend a lot of time doing, and so it's something that I find interesting. But at the same time, it's something that you need to take into consideration. Do you want to do a full-blown 401k plan? Do you want to do a simple, 401k? You can also do what's called a simple IRA, which allows you to the employee to contribute $12,500 into an IRA plan that's a little bit more controlled by the employee. So what happens is with a 401k plan, it goes into a pot that the money goes into the funds that of the trustee that's going to be running the plan. Okay, and they're going to be doing all the investing for the employee, and they're going to give them like a set of funds that they can choose from, and usually though they break it out into risk tolerances. So let's say, how risk adverse are you? So if I'm 20 years old, I'm very risky. I can invest it all in high risk stuff. I don't care, because if I lose it, I can contribute more later on. And I still have time. If I'm 57, probably a little less risky. I'm kind of like at that point, we're going to get ready to start pulling money out here in the next 10 years. So we probably want to be a little less risky as a result of that. So that's kind of how they're going to do it. With the IRA, I can actually say, I want to buy this fund with it. I want to buy that fund with it, buy that fund with it. But they're not as involved with those as they would be with a 401k. And then, of course, your individual retirement plans, your IRAs, traditional and Roth IRAs, your employees can always do those on their own, but that has nothing to do with what you offer. The Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation was created by the ERISA, which is to protect benefits on private sector plans. If a pension plan for some reason can't pay benefits, so if you have a defined benefit plan, very good example. Say, for example, Chrysler goes out of business and their pension plan that they have can't be paid out. And I'm assuming, of course, that Chrysler actually owns it. It's probably the unions that actually do. But say, for example, that the pensions can't be paid out because it wasn't adequately funded. Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation will step in and make some of those payments. Will basically do a bailout, for lack of a better term. And I don't want to say that it's a bailout because it's always federal funds, but they're paying an insurance. It's kind of like an insurance policy. Like I said, it comes from, the insurance premiums paid by the companies whose plans the Pension Benefit Corporation Guarantee protects. Although if we had like a massive meltdown, would it cause a federal bailout? I don't know, but that's not part of this class. Most organizations do not offer pension plans anymore. They're just too expensive. And I could go into reasons why, but again, that's going to blow this class time. And I've talked probably more in detail than what the book does on this for obvious reasons. Voluntary, they also offer paid time off. Now I'm going to group all of these next four into one category. So you have paid time off, you have paid holidays, paid sick leave, and then paid vacation. Some companies, what they're going to do is they, paid holidays is very self-explanatory. So, New Year's Day, Memorial Day, Christmas, Independence Day, Thanksgiving, federal holidays, are paid off. So, one aspect of that, sometimes companies will allow one of those holidays to be a floater, as we call it. So what ends up happening is that they say, look, I need, very good example, tax industry. We have two major deadlines around holidays. So Easter, which I think it's a federal holiday still. I can't remember if it is. Usually falls right around tax season, or right around deadline time, April 15th. The next deadline, though, is October 15th, which is when Columbus Day happens. So what ends up happening is that a lot of firms will say, look, we're going to give you federal holidays off, but if there's an Easter holiday or if there is a, what is it called, the Columbus Day holiday, we're going to let you float those. And so sometimes what will end up happening is people will say, oh, I'll come in and work on Columbus Day, but, just let me take Christmas Eve off in addition to Christmas. That way they get 2 paid days off as holiday that they don't have to use their vacation time for. Then you have vacation pay, which is, of course, go out, go do whatever it is you want to do, and you can, use it for vacation. If you don't use it, usually what ends up happening is, and if you quit the organization, you have additional vacation days, they'll pay you out for those vacation days. Sick days, I worked at a company, the last company I worked at that had sick leave, it was like 5 days. The problem with sick leave, you can bank it, which was kind of nice. The bad part about it is if you don't use it, you are going to lose it if you ever leave that company, because technically that is not paid to you as a payment. Okay, that's not part of your compensation package, so to speak. It's something that they said, look, you're sick. We don't want you here. We'd rather you be home. We'll give you a couple days to go deal with that. And I think what ended up happening is over time, people began to realize that managing all of this was just kind of a pain in the you-know-what. So they kind of combined sick leave and paid vacation into this other category called paid time off. You can use it for sick days. You can use it for, you can use it for sick days. You can use it for other type, for paid vacation or whatever. And then usually if you leave the company early and you have PTO left, they'll pay you out. And they talk about paid time off here, which is PTO. I don't know why they said it twice, but anyways. Final note on compensation when creating so the ability to recruit and retain is the most important factor when we're talking about this. All right, so that's it. I don't have anything else to say on compensation, which is kind of amazing. I have lots to say on compensation because I could talk about this class forever, but we're running short on time anyways. If you have any questions, reach out to me. If you're a student of mine, I've actually been getting a few more emails, so I'm very happy with that. If you are not in my class, go ahead and leave a comment in the comment box below. I'll get back to you as it goes straight to my phone when somebody does that. Here's hearing from you, and hopefully everything's working out. Thank you very much for paying attention.